Thank you for joining us for this discussion on looking beyond 2030 for technology evolution. I'm Don Zimmerman with NetApp, and NetApp is honored to be a supporting sponsor of AFCEA's TechNet Cyber. On this panel, DISA leaders will discuss the evolving demands and threats that technology must address 5 years out and beyond. As the intelligent data infrastructure company, NetApp equips the warfighter to stay ahead of disruptions by providing a storage OS with built-in zero trust policies and AI-ready capabilities to leverage NVIDIA use cases backed by the industry's only anti-ransomware guarantee. Our moderator today is Mr. Steve Wallace, DISA's CTO and Director of Emerging Technologies, which develops, executes and prioritizes new technologies such as zero trust, 5G networking, and quantum-resistant cryptography. A graduate of Harvard's Kennedy School for Senior Executives, Mr. Wallace is a recognized leader in future technologies. He served as DISA's Chief of Cyber Innovation, the lead engineer for Defense Enterprise Email, and developed expertise for ICAM for the federal government. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Steve Wallace. Thank you.
All right, so yesterday afternoon when we had a panel on this stage, we made it 20 minutes in before the fire alarm went off. And everybody got a reprieve because they all went to the bar. So let's see what happens. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So this panel's got a couple of reasons why we're doing it. One, to talk about where technology is going. And then there's a few folks here that are certainly new faces to many of you that I'd like you to get to know as well. So let's go ahead and let's start by introducing them. We'll start here with Scarlett. Scarlett, you want to?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am not Steve Wallace. I am Scarlett Swerdlow.
Nobody wants more Steve Wallace.
Yeah. We'll just.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. So I am a relatively new member of the tech strategy team in the CTO's office at DISA. I came to DISA by way of Defense Digital Service, which is affectionately known as SecDef SWAT Team of Nerds, now in the Chief Digital and AI office in OSD. And my background before that is as a data scientist in industry. And since coming into the DoD, I've had an opportunity to work on a very wide range of problems, everything from using digitizing human tissue samples for medical machine learning uses to base defense systems and how we move data between them. So the kind of through line of my work in DoD has been how do we free data from the systems it's in to be where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And I am excited to have brought that campaign to DISA.
Excellent. I'm Brian Herman. I'm the Program Executive Officer for Cyber Capabilities at DISA. And that ranges from everything at the perimeter of the DoD's networks, where we connect to the internet, where we cross-domain, where we have gateways to work with our mission partners, to include capabilities like ICAM, and then really taking all of that data together and making it available for decision making, especially for defensive cyber operators, is a big part of what we need to do. So what Scarlett said, freeing that data, connecting the tissue between tools that have historically not been connected, is a big part of what we're trying to accomplish in PEO Cyber.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Corder. I am not an IT guy. I grew up in the field artillery. And then I switched over to Army strategist. I spent some time at USFK doing offensive fires, and then 3.5 years in Hawaii doing defensive fires. And then I came to DISA, and what I found interesting, and I work in the J53, which is Combat Command Plans and Integration. And I think the sweet spot that we found is that there is the services that Combat Commands are looking out much farther than your average IT person that is doing agile development. And so the sweet spot for us in DISA J5, which is a relatively new organization, is how do we shape where the agency is going to meet the needs of agencies and services as they're thinking about 2040, 2030 and beyond. So that's what I've been working on.
Good afternoon, I'm Eric Malott. I'm on the tech strategy team under the CTO. with Scarlett and Jeremy as well. I've been with DISA for a number of years as a contractor, doing a lot of data center design, cloud work, and cybersecurity engineering, supporting a variety of projects. But more recently, have been focusing on SIPRNet modernization, some perimeter modernization with Brian's team, as well as some satellite, starting to look at use of some of the satellite services that are out there, and then just new evolutionary things that we need to be focusing on to help, not only the agency but the department as a whole. So, thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Bryan, as Eric and Scarlett both mentioned. Relatively new to the organization, I guess about 4 months. I come in from Duo Security, where I was one of the leads on their built environment security program. Prior to that, the last 20 years have been primarily spent in the software engineering, software architecture space with the focus on DevSecOps. And so that's kind of the line that I'm bringing to the organization and really kind of taking a look at how that fits, how we're doing there, what are some opportunities in that regard. Prior to this tour with DISA, I spent a little bit of time as a contractor supporting DISA and then several other segments of the DoD. So happy to be here.
So one of the things you may have noticed is we have several people that are fairly new to the agency, and they mentioned they're part of the tech strategy team as an augmentee to the CTO's office. To give you a little bit of background on what the heck happened there, and the way that the agency is approaching problems differently these days, and with the stand-up of the J5 as well. We saw, and I'll give you the prime example of sort of what led to some of this, is when we did Thunderdome, we were working through how we wanted to move past JRSS and the regional security sort of standard, and a lot of really good work went into that. A number of us were in a room in front of a whiteboard and just trying to knock the problem out. But then we quickly saw that as we were moving into an acquisition phase, that we had to pull back on the contractor support because obviously they needed to be firewalled off. And then, a lot of the other folks that were involved from the civilian and military side, they had day jobs. This wasn't necessarily in their job jar. They had other things to go and do. So some of the progress slowed there. So what that pointed to was we needed more strategic think in the agency to drive capability, right? So what we did is we started going out and canvassing and looking across industry for folks that in specific areas had expertise. Scarlett on the data side, Eric on the data center cloud networking cyber side, Jeremy on the DevOps side, another name who is moving over to the team in the very near future. Many of you know Julian Breyer will be joining this strategy team, focusing on AI and cryptography, those sorts of things. So the bottom line is we're bringing this team together ultimately to get behind the J5 and help the J5 from the strategic side of things. So with that, let's get into some of the questions. We made it past 10 minutes, no fire alarm, so I think we're doing pretty well. So I'll open this to any of you who want to jump on it first, and let's just freeform and sort of go through it. What are the developments you see coming in the next 5 years that are going to drive adoption beyond 2030, right? We typically talk in terms of the FIDEP. Well, let's get past the FIDEP, and what do you see sort of coming? What are some of the more wild, things that maybe aren't fully developed yet that you kind of see on the horizon?
So I'll take this, and I won't go down the AI or the Zero Trust or the DevSecOps route. One of the things that I see on the horizon I've been working on, and it's kind of really interesting to me, is these satellite services, these LEO, MEO, low Earth orbit satellite services like your Starlinks and OneWebs and some of the other capabilities coming on the horizon. What's interesting there is that beyond just communications and being able to extend some of our capabilities to sites, to locations that we don't currently have DISA connectivity, we may be able to, I've seen offerings on the horizon where you could see at some point data center services in these orbits, in these constellations, like where we could have compute and storage and security services, which to me is like, thinking back to where we've come from on-premise to cloud to now, data centers in the sky, if you will, is pretty phenomenal. That I think is there's a lot of potential there, a lot of value for us extending our capabilities to the warfighters, to areas that we have not historically served, and then how do we secure that, and what other capabilities can we provide to that? I think is pretty interesting on the horizon.
I guess I would add to that from a transport perspective, the concept of leveraging the cloud service providers transport as well is an idea that I think is headed our way, where we're able to potentially even essentially hide DoD's traffic in plain sight in a way that would be hard for an adversary to take out without also doing harm to themselves as well. So I think there's some that could go on there. I believe that a number of things that we've historically assumed that we had to do within the department will begin to be offered as services, and that doesn't sound like an amazing transformation, but it is when you don't have to develop something new. I've said this a number of times, so if you've heard it, ignore it. But the challenge for us is that we can't seem to get anybody in China to write a requirements document for new capabilities. They're not going to tell me exactly how they're going to attack. So we come to you, in industry, and then we look at the threats that we're seeing, and we try to devise good ways to do that. But nobody wrote a requirements document for CBII. Nobody wrote, requirements documents for Thunderdome. It was an idea that we saw some things evolving in the world, and so we use these forums for that same purpose. And I see that, adopting as a service models, I think that the tremendous change that we have is actually connecting the data from previously siloed systems, and understanding that data is not just cyber data. It is important data to make both technical cyber decisions, user experience decisions, and so on. So I think a lot of that's changing. And for me, I know it's getting a little far from the question, but I think it's not just strategic thought. It's actually having elements inside of the agency that have the ability to turn good ideas into operational capabilities, because otherwise they sit on a shelf and we say, wow, that was a great idea, but we for some reason couldn't afford to make the transition.
Anybody else?
Can I expand on?
Yeah, please.
So-
I was actually going to throw you a curveball, but go for it.
Oh, good. I'm glad I got ahead of that then. To expand on what Dr. Herman was saying with, hide in the noise, I think that's a shift that's happening in data analytics. Whereas before, the IC community you would get your inputs and you would have to figure out the narrative from the pieces that you understood. But now you have, like, a lot of strategies talk about the Internet of Military Things, and everything is connected. We used to have a concept called like emissions control, and you would stay quiet and undetected. Well, the opposite is true now, where everything requires connectivity. And so instead of being quiet, it's being as loud as everything else is. And so the challenge to data analytics is you're no longer taking 4 or 5 pieces of evidence and creating a story. You're taking 1 million pieces of data and then extrapolating what's important and getting the chaff separated from what's important to you. I think it's a huge challenge that's headed our way with data analytics.
Good point. Anybody? Go for it.
Yeah, so thinking through this from the lens of software engineer, DevSecOps person, right? And I'm kind of thinking through, and I'll jump on the AI bomb. Thinking through second order effects of the innovations that are happening right now, right? Everybody can sort of acknowledge there's a lot happening pretty quickly. But then how do we take advantage of that really from a workforce perspective? So taking a good idea and actually executing on that. How do we actually learn to use this technology in an actionable way day to day, from a developer's desktop through deployment, tooling for automating cybersecurity in more effective ways and more quickly, closing those feedback loops, and using the technology in that capacity. So I'll be curious to see how that transforms. There's already segments of the industry coming out related to software engineering intelligence, right? So platforms are starting to emerge to aggregate, synthesize, and help you make better decisions about how you're building software and delivering it. So how does that continue to evolve and then start to integrate into platforms as a service or X as a service over time?
All right. Anybody? Okay. All right, so one of the challenges that we have, in our emerging technology team, as well as it happens elsewhere within the agency as well, and other organizations of the like, is how do we ensure that we're solving real problems and not just being shiny object chasers? So, anybody want to jump on that one?
I have thoughts on this.
You're the one that inspired this question, so I would hope that you had thoughts on this.
I'm ready. So yeah, I think so it's interesting for me to be on a team or a panel where we're talking about emerging technology, because I think there is that risk that we get excited by new things, which are exciting, and we want to kind of play with them and explore and see what's possible. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure we're solving, a real problem that a real person has. And we need to be able to identify that person by name and have a persona in mind for them, and really understand, have empathy for what are they responsible for? How do they do that work today? What do they want that work to look like in the future? So I think, and I think this goes back to the first question as well. I think that something that I'm interested to see how it evolves, particularly in the government and defense space, is as there's increasing focus and sort of recognition that customer experience is just as important, if not more important, than the underlying technology. How does that end up affecting our kind of technology decisions, what we experiment with, what we ultimately kind of offer as programs? So I think one of the core ways that we make sure that we're solving real problems is by injecting that customer experience focus into our work. When I came into DISA, we see in our program offices, we have program management leadership, we have technical leadership. Something that I hope to see us increasingly have is that user experience leadership as well. That person that is the voice for the customer or the end user that's ultimately using the services that we offer. And is able to inject that into the conversation, as well as just user experience practice of who is this person that we're serving, how do they work today, how do they want to work, what are their pain points, how can we help them? So that just as much as we're considering, what is are we delivering something on time, are we delivering within budget, can we also make sure that we're delivering something that actually improves the experience of our end user? Because that's an area where within government and DoD we often fall short, not because of bad intentions, but just because of our processes.
Anybody else?
I think I was going to add, in a different kind of lens, the way that I've always approached sort of trying to figure out where we go from a technology perspective, whether as a vendor or as a civilian here, is three-pronged, and I kind of work with David here with the DISA Next strategy a little bit, in the sense that looking at the DoD strategies of our mission partners, like understanding where the other services and agencies are looking to go, and then understanding where DISA and our suite of capabilities or future services could fit into that. Kind of looking at that, as well as looking at where the tech horizon is for the vendor community. So working with a lot of folks here in the room on where they're going from a technology perspective, understanding that against our customer requirements, and then looking internally at our existing programs and sort of the evolution, the gaps, the requirements of those internal programs, trying to put those three factors together for us to decide, like, hey, there's a technology area that we need to explore because it may benefit an internal program or it may meet a future customer or mission partner requirement.
There's a guy named Andrew Krepenevich, and he worked for the Office of Net Assessment from 89 to 92, and he was studying the Russian Reconnaissance Strike Complex. And what he learned was this model that we used when we were thinking through DISA Next, and it was the push of technology and the pull of operational requirements. And what he learned was Central Command at the time needed to do over-the-horizon persistent targeting, but they didn't have the language to describe, and they didn't understand the technology to describe to the technologists what they needed. And the technologists didn't understand, from a warfighter perspective, the challenge of what the horizon does and how over-the-horizon targeting works. So his model was the technologist understands the push, and you push concepts based on what technology can do, and you are the subject matter expert on that. But there's a recursive balance with the warfighter who owns the requirement, who says, okay, if this is what you can do, then I can adapt the that technology to meet this concept based on my requirements. And so there's a give and take between what the technologist offers and what the warfighter requires, and that like push and pull of technology and requirements, I think, is a good model for us to think about.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I think it's like, how do we do more to create that shared understanding, so that we're bringing the expertise that both sides have together to make sure that we're solving a real problem in a way that's real for the warfighter.
Yeah, and in a very practical way, that's a challenge that we've historically had, where program offices maybe didn't understand the challenges they were presenting to their customers, and so when we provide cyber capabilities, for example, we need to understand. I go out to DISA Global, and the DCO analyst will put 12 to 15 sticky notes in front of me and say, "This is what I have to do because you guys haven't gotten all of the information together on a single screen that allows me to be more effective in an automated way." And so that's the kind of the program office say, "Sorry about that, but I only do that part of it." And the strategic planning is to recognize that the totality of that is a problem that encompasses many programs and needs to have thought that's beyond anybody's scope. And so if you don't have somebody looking more broadly than an individual program, you perpetuate those kinds of problems.
Anybody else? Go, please.
The only other thing that I'll add, and I think Scarlett touched on it, and I think Eric touched on it a little bit, is this fusion of these different elements, but doing that in a way that is scalable and repeatable. So you have some processes in place, and I think there are opportunities to re-examine processes that we have in place for this intake, this application of technology, and then actually working the problem to make sure that we're still solving the same real problem 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road. Things change. Failing fast, I think, is important as well, and putting ourselves in a position to be able to identify, look, this isn't working, we need a different course of action, right? Not waiting 9 months or 12 months before we re-vector ourselves. So I think there's opportunities to kind of reimagine that, looking to lean startup sort of technologies and philosophies to bring some of that in and kind of take a fresh look at how we do things.
Okay. All right, thanks. So let's tweak it a little bit and let's talk about data. Because we talked about AI, we've said zero trust already, right? Let's talk about data now. We're gonna fill the bingo card, guys. So let's talk about the specific things that DISA either is doing or needs to do to actually achieve that idea of making data the center of gravity. So anybody want to jump on that one?
So from my perspective, the first thing is something that we're actually underway with, which is consolidating data. Instead of having it in multiple silos, being able to bring it together for whatever purpose it can be used for. And in my case, we're looking at it predominantly from making cybersecurity decisions. But then the second is to automate the responses. So in order for that to be useful, that means that we have to have DoD secured AI tools that we can feed that data into. We can't do that in a commercial space right now. Separately, I will tell you that the single weakest pillar that we have related to zero trust, and this is not just DISA, it is department-wide, is the data pillar. We have not cracked the nut on tagging the data so that we can make fine-grained access control decisions. We're doing some piloting work ourselves, but I think if you look at all the implementation plans across the department, that is the single weakest point of what's going on in terms of zero trust. And then I think every organization needs to be able to think through what would be the right access control policies for their data. So once you've tagged it, do we have the attributes about individuals, about conditions upon which we would allow that data to be accessed? That is not trivial, and I think there's a significant amount of work to do in that space.
I want to pick up on a couple things that you said, but also kind of make a slightly different point, which is I actually think when I've worked in organizations outside of the DoD that I would consider kind of data-driven, I think a lot of the things that made them that actually had nothing to do with data, and I think we need to focus more on those. So one is going back to the point I made earlier. We need to focus on like what are the real problems that we're trying to solve that we think data will help us. And I think with PEO Cyber, like that's one of your guiding lights, is you do have that sense of like, okay, in the defensive cyberspace, you know, how can we use this data to do our work? But I see many organizations kind of end up taking a little bit more of like a top-down approach, where they sort of think data is the end in and of itself. But that's not the case. At the end of the day, data is a tool that helps us solve problems. And so understanding what those problems are and letting that be our guiding light, I think, is the first thing that DISA and any organization needs to do to become data-driven, is actually not to focus on the data, but focus on what you're trying to enable with the data. The second piece is about talent, which we've touched on in a few of our comments so far. We need to nurture data talent within our organization. So, you know, what does that mean? Like simple things like letting people who have skills in data analysis, data science, data engineering actually do work that uses those skills. So actually focus on technical work. We also need to make sure that they have the tools they need to do their job. This is something I've seen across DoD as a pain point, is even if you bring in great technical talent, they often don't have the tools that they need in order to do the job they've been hired to do. So that's as simple as like, what programming languages are they allowed to use? How do they download libraries or dependencies that they need? Lots of things that are kind of will not show up on the buzzword bingo card, but are like actually how a data scientist would work. So how do we make sure they have what they need? I do think the last piece, which kind of goes back to some of what was just said, is that we also really need to be a demanding customer of the systems and the tech that we invest in, and make sure that that data is accessible. You know, we shouldn't be investing in any technology where it's not possible to access the data using sort of widely adopted, preferably completely open standards and protocols. I think about, you know, development work I do outside of DoD. I'm currently doing a project where I'm working with some data from Spotify. I didn't have to find a program manager at Spotify. I didn't have to fill out a 2875 asking me for access to Spotify. I found their developer portal. I found a way that I was able to authenticate. I read, or I didn't actually read, but I signed off on their terms and conditions. And then I was able to then use their documentation to start to access their data. That is the experience that we should be demanding of any technology that we invest in, and of our own data products that we're producing. And I think those are the things that, if we want to be data centric, we need to kind of, I think we've gotten on board with the objective, and now we need to be a little bit more nuanced about how do we actually get there.
Absolutely. Anybody else? All right. So I think anybody who's been around on the planet for any period of time realizes technology is always changing. We're at an interesting inflection point, though, especially with the advent or the broader adoption of AI. It's almost like the 90s for those of you who were there, but it seems exponentially faster. So how do you all see that exponential, that knee in the curve, and the speed of adoption? What's that?
He said he was 3.
I was 3 when the 90s started.
Wait, what?
I was 3 years old in 1990.
I have T-shirts older than you. Anyway. That's why I love these guys. So, all right. I'm going to read the question all over again. So how do you all see, like, with that, with that knee in the curve? There's books, Dave, about it. If you wanted to go back and read it. Pets.com was a fascinating website. Went bust. But how do you see, us changing our adoption strategy with that? It is a fast-paced thing. You've got, as the director talked about this morning, the pacing threats around the world. So how do you all see that changing our strategy with respect to adoption? Sure.
So, the analogy in my mind is, before, up until right after World War II, the tech industry was led by the Department of Defense. Like, you have what Skunkworks was able to do with a slide rule and create the SR-71 Blackbird, right? But then even after Korea, we have Defense Production Act, but the tech, who built the technology shifted to industry in the 50s. And I think that has continued. It will probably continue. And I think from an acquisitions perspective, I think, and you and I have talked about this for the adoption of AI, in that it is our ability to interface with industry, but knowing that the dollars that mature the technology are industry dollars and not tax dollars, and then understanding where to apply some tactical patience as industry develops tech, and then where we insert ourselves. And I think that's much different than us writing an initial capabilities document and saying, I need you to build this cool tool. It's us, like your role at TechWatch, and saying these things are coming. Here's potential ways that we could do military adaptation of this COTS product. And so it's about leveraging in the right time and place when we adopt the technology and when we need to wait and let industry continue to do what industry does best.
And I think part of that conversation is ensuring that the tech plan for industry tools aligns with the needs that we have or is headed in the right direction, and then recognizing that we also have to conform to a little bit more open standards, because we can't be locked into a particular technology or we're never going to be able to keep up with the pace of what's going on in the world.
I'll pull a thread that Scarlett threw out on her last question, which is related to the workforce and more culturally from an organizational standpoint, right? I think to be able to effectively actuate emerging technology, we have to be in a continuous learning kind of mode, right? We have to have people who are smart, people who are looking forward and understanding what's coming, to be in a position to be able to make decisions about, hey, there's an opportunity here for this thing that's coming down the pipe. Let's start to position ourselves around that. So I think that kind of speaks to organizational agility and being nimble. I think the other aspect of that is, if you start to think about it from more of an architectural and a solution perspective as well, you know, not painting yourself into a corner with solutions. So opening yourself up, using good design patterns, using good strategy and good enterprise integration patterns so that you're able to respond quickly to an emerging technology, the next greatest version of this thing's coming out. I want to be able to take advantage of it. I don't want to be able to have to unravel half of my solution to now pull this new technology in, right? So being smart about how we're building things and the guidance that we're providing in those regards.
So I'm gonna do moderator 101 bad thing here and inject myself into the conversation. But Scarlett, you made a good point to me last week, earlier this week, whatever it was, about thinking about, rather than chasing the specific technology or the buzzwords, about us working towards putting out problem statements and not trying to necessarily, say, oh, we want this particular tech, but these are the areas. Can you talk about any kind of thoughts in that space?
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of going back to, I feel like I've made this point every time I've spoken, so you might be getting sick of it. But yeah, again, going back to like, what is that real problem that we're trying to solve, and being able to, put it in some sort of template, like, as a fill in the blank, I want to fill in the blank so that fill in the blank. But that we actually have that idea of like, what's the persona of the person trying to get something done? What's the task they're trying to accomplish, and why? Why do they want to do that? And I think having that sort of be the guiding light around like, what are the problems we're trying to solve? So kind of shifting from like, what's the technology that we're watching that looks cool, to instead like, what are the critical problems that exist in our space that we know we need to solve for the department? And then using that more as the watch list, the problem watch list, and then letting that guide what technology are we looking at. And I think, some of those, again, so much of this comes back to creating shared understanding. Some of those conversations are happening, but making that visible, so that way our mission partners sort of understand the why of what we're focusing on, as well as the vendors that we're working with, and letting that be the focus. I think that's if we keep that as the guiding light, then the technology that's available to us, like, yes, we absolutely need a situation where we can do acquisitions quickly, where we can experiment, where we have a workforce that can kind of evaluate those things, but it gives us that North Star that we can kind of always focus on, and sort of in a way, almost the technology actually it's irrelevant or it's arbitrary because it's about the problem that we're trying to solve.
So one of the things, and as I sat on a panel up here yesterday with a few of the others, Mr. Barnhurst and others, it was an interesting back and forth with the audience because there was clearly, and this is an age-old challenge, is how does the department understand what you all can bring forward? And then at the same time, how do you understand what in the heck we actually need? There's always that, that friction there. So one of the things that I'll tell you we're going to try this year, and our team will do this to put this together. We are going to put together, as we publish the Tech Watch list later this fall, a revised edition, we're also going to publish a number of challenge statements that don't get into the technology side, but say, here's a number of things that we're looking to talk about challenge-wise over the coming year. So we're going to try that. I don't know what it's going to look like. It really just, it started to get codified last week in the conversation with Scarlett, but look for that later this fall, and I want to try that as a better way to sort of, collaborate with industry and sort of bring those things forward. So let's do one more question, and then we'll get into any questions from you all. So Major, let me come back to you. The 5 is a new organization, right? You guys have been around
1 October.
October, yeah, 1 October. So you're 10 months old, not quite 3 years old, but you're 10 months old. Okay. So with that, like you talked a little bit about the beginning, but what's the drive to sort of to get us looking over the horizon, to get us thinking, to planning, to bringing the agency together?
Yeah, I don't know.
Cool. All right.
So
Everybody to the bar.
yeah, our nascent J5, very powerful nascent 6-person J5. Our path to the future. Right now, we are focused on getting the DISA Next strategy right, which is published, and you all should read it. We're working on the vision right now and then implementation plan. But to get us ahead, we have to better our relationship across the command 5s and into the service concept centers. Like the Army has the Future Concept Center down in Newport News. And that is what bridges that gap between like your team looking at the technology and our team interfacing with the services. And they produce really fantastic documents. They'll say, how do we think about operational maneuver on land in 2040? And they don't know, right? Because if you think about the future, it's like a pyramid, and it gets foggier the farther it gets away. But you start to give yourself some aim points, and our role in the 5 is to kind of aggregate what does the Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, et cetera, and then what are the functional and geographic commands? What do they envision as the future? And then for DISA Next, we read 87 documents, a bit of light reading, to try to envision what is the expectation of the Defense Information System Agency in 2030, and that's what drove DISA Next. So where we see the 5 with our mighty 6 today and then at full build, like maybe 28, is us being that conduit from the services and commands as they think past the 5 to the 10 to the 15-year mark, so we can better understand the aim points so that we can start some necessary movement now and kind of feel out what that future could look like. I think that's the niche that we're striving for.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so let's open it up to questions. So don't be shy, folks. Oh, come on. With all of you people here, you can't tell me that not one of you is just thinking about a question. Brian, question? You made eye contact, so now you never looked the dinosaur in the eyes, buddy. There we go.
I don't think it's on. It is
There we
now.
go.
I think it's a question that Ms. Swerdlow addressed. My name is Jason Brown from the Army Cyber Institute. I'm a Cyber Law Policy Strategy Research Division lead. And I'm curious about the human factor in your systems-based analysis, right? What methods do you use to gather and analyze and interpret, and then communicate these individual user experience activities. I think someone mentioned, I go talk to them and they show me a bunch of sticky notes. That's there's a methodology for that. What are you doing to formalize getting that and eliciting it from your clients and the stakeholders that you support?
Yes. A lot of different methodologies. And again, this is one of the benefits of as we bring in more user experience expertise into the organization, that this is, they have their technical area of work where they have a bunch of tools in their toolbox so they can help us do this. But I can talk about some of the things that I did since I am relatively new, and actually my background isn't in networks or cybersecurity. So coming in, it was really important to me to try and see the world through the eyes of the people doing the work, and kind of go where the work is, and try and understand what a day in the life of whether it's a DCO analyst or a network operator, technician, kind of understand their work. So one example would be something called just user story mapping. So kind of literally building a narrative flow of, so here I'll give an example that you can all do in your own. If you were to kind of close your eyes and think of what is literally the first thing you did this morning when you woke up. So for me, it was I hit my snooze button once. But then if we were to kind of keep doing that, we'd start to build a flow of what did our morning look like. And then we might ask questions of like, is every morning look like this? What does it look like when you sleep through your alarm and it's an emergency? Or what does it look like on a weekend morning versus a weekday morning? But you start to get a sense of what does that user's experience look like? And you can start to identify like what's really good about this, what's working really well. What are pain points that currently exist, or frictions that we want to improve? And you can start to map out what the journey through their day or through their work looks like, and then start to identify where can we make improvements to that. So I think all of these methodologies, it's really about creating shared understanding. It's great to read documents that people produce. I think we've all had the experience of reading a document, thinking we understand what the author of the document meant, and then later having a realization that like we had two totally different understandings of that document. So I think those experiences where we're in a room together and we're telling stories are actually really important to being able to kind of enable exactly what a lot of the folks on this panel have been talking about, of that sort of like push and pull between what technology exists and what requirements the warfighter has.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
There, thanks. My name is Ian Tian. We're from Mattermost. We do an open source secure collaboration infrastructure for secure collaboration for critical infrastructure. One of the things that a lot of people so we talk about things in the future, I didn't hear very much about sort of interoperability. Like how do all the pieces work together? And it's a big topic and people kind of shy away. So I'm just kind of curious, like in the big picture, how do you think about all those different pieces working together?
Oh, and Eric's smiling because we've been through this, but
Yeah.
go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Eric.
Or Dave?
Go ahead first.
No, I think from my experience, being so close to trying to integrate a lot of different technologies, capabilities, platforms, especially on Brian's side in cyber, we have a lot of security platforms across our enterprise, from perimeter all the way down to the endpoint. And that's been a very frustrating point for us as well. And that's been a plea to the industry, is that how do we get better integration, right? How do we motivate our vendor community to try to integrate some of their capabilities together, possibly use more open APIs and more, less proprietary APIs to allow us to share data and information, allow these systems to talk together. But to your point, I mean, it's a frustrating, it's a hard question. I think Steve's talked about it a lot of times. We've all kind of talked about it. We look for any help in that area, right? For sure, as far as being able to integrate, because we don't have the answer. It is a pain point because we have a very diverse ecosystem of capabilities.
Yeah, I'm thinking about attribute-based access control. Everyone wants a mission partner environment, and one of the things Jeremy said earlier is it's hard to scale the models we have inside the DoD to the size and scope that we need it to be. Like there are models for ABAC, right, attribute-based access control, but that is, you have to have good data, you have to have the right data, You have to agree on those same data standard. And then if you are thinking about the mission partner environment, you have to scale that. Like, that's a Z factor that we're not used to having. Like, we have 1.3 million people in the military, but then you have to add all the other country militaries to that as we want to have mission partner environments. And so I think the challenge to interoperability from a data side, from a scalability side, and from what Dr. Herman's team has to figure out with ICAM is how do we scale ABAC? And I don't know if we have the answer for that. So if industry can build that, that'd be great.
And in some cases, the the idea of open standards being part of the solutions is counter to industry's desire to have differentiation from a marketplace perspective. And so the one thing that we have to do is to be firm on not allowing ourselves to get trapped into an area, and that sometimes means Steve gets thrown out of offices on the West Coast, but we have to back that up.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to that. I think so one, I actually really like that you use interoperability versus integration, because I think, with enough money and resources and ridiculous code, like, you can integrate two systems. But what we want is a system to come and sort of be designed in a way that's going to allow for that interoperability for systems we don't even know exist yet. And so in addition to the us being firm about those requirements, I think this also goes back to talent and some of the points that Jeremy made. We need the talent in-house to be able to, if a vendor says yes, this is interoperable, yes, it has these standards, yes, you should be able to do this. We need kind of people who can flex and be is that really true? Let's kind of hold the feet to the fire and kind of confirm that is actually a thing that is true. If we're not doing that, then we might kind of find out later, technically that was correct, but, in terms of practice, it's actually a lot harder to do. So that's something, I think, another reason to have that in-house talent that can, even if not building out sort of sophisticated, systems, is able to test some of those claims that products make.
So, did you want to say something, Jerry? Okay. I was looking out for our public affairs person because I'm about to drop a 4-letter word, and I want to make sure somebody catches them when they hit the ground. So the 4-letter word is JRSS. We learned a lot from JRSS, right? The whole notion behind JRSS was best of breed for every component in the doggone stack, right? We are going to have the very best of everything, and then we are going to attempt to integrate or make interoperate between all of these components. Didn't go well, guys. I don't know if anybody noticed that. It was a struggle. It got better as we learned, but we stumbled for a while, right? So kind of to your point, there are definitely two ends of the pendulum, right? That's the one end of the pendulum. The other end of that pendulum is we're going to buy a single vendor stack and it is going to be wonderful and it's the only thing that we'll ever need, and there you go. It's all integrated because they did all the work. I don't think that's the answer either. So it's finding that balance and achieving that balance. It's having the talent to do it. It's everything that all of these guys said. But it is, I will tell you, that is a constant bit of tension within the department is, how do we not go all in one way and buy everything from every SKU out of one vendor's catalog, to buying a single SKU off of every vendor's catalog. So it's definitely something that we wrestle with. So, next question.
I don't know, Steve. I saw a bunch of swords and lightsabers.
I saw Jillian roll up with hers. Yeah. All right. Any last call? All right. Well, that's it. We'll get you out of here 10 minutes early. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.